Hey, I'm Jason Helmick, a PM on the PowerShell team, and in the last video in this Crescendo series, we got Crescendo installed on our authoring/dev box, and we're ready to start creating our first amplified commandlet. Now, I'm going to follow the rest of the Crescendo documentation for the rest of the demonstrations. The best part about this is you've got all of the documentation to my demonstrations, and I encourage you to try this out for yourself so you can get a little bit more familiar with Crescendo. Now, at this point, the documentation starts with some guidance on both selecting and working with your console commands. Now, let's briefly start there. And you can read this yourself, but what I'd like to do is add in some notes. So let's take a look at that, and then we'll get started in creating our commands. The last time we were together, we were getting Crescendo installed, but the next portion in the documentation, we've added a couple of articles here to help you with what kind of considerations you'd like to make when choosing a command line tool to wrap with Crescendo, and what features to amplify. So let's start with this first one. And you know what? You can read this yourself, but I want to point out a couple of notes here. First of all, what are command line tools that make good commandlets? Well, a couple of things. Is the original tool difficult to use? And if you think about my first examples using netsh, that tool is difficult to remember, difficult to use, so it's kind of making itself a good candidate to be wrapped into a commandlet that's easier to discover, easier to work with. Does the command line tool provide difficult output to work with an automation? And a lot of command line tools provide string-based output, which is difficult in PowerShell to work with. So oftentimes, you're going to want to wrap a command just so that you can get object-based output. The command line tool doesn't provide adequate help. Another benefit to Crescendo is that you can add useful help information when you do the wrapping. Now, things that make some bad tools. Oh man, does the commandlet already exist? Okay. Do you remember the first video where I was showing off ipconfig and how I wrapped? Here, let me show you. Let me open up PowerShell, and I was showing you this. I took ipconfig and I wrapped it with Crescendo into get ipconfig. Woo, it works, yay. Hey, look, this is probably not a good tool for you to invest your time in wrapping. The reason is you want to know whether there's a tool that already exists that does what you need it to do. And let me give you an example. I shouldn't have wrapped ipconfig, because if I do this real quick, let's do get help. Are there any commandlets that help me with IP addresses? I'm going to use get help to go look to see if there's anything that exists. And here's the thing. There's a module out there called net TCP/IP that already has a commandlet called get net IP address. And when you run this, get net IP address, it does the same thing, essentially, that ipconfig does, and it already provides object-based output. So the moral of the story is, before you go wrapping a tool, see if something already exists. A couple places that you can look. Yeah, check your own system to see if it's already been included. So try get help. The other thing you can do, use your favorite search engine. Bing it, go look for it. See if somebody's already written a module that does what you need it to do. And hey, on the flip side of that, if you invest your time and wrap a command, why not share that module so that other people can benefit from it and that they don't have to invest their time to wrap it? So there's a couple of things that you can do. Make sure, though, that before you invest the time to wrap it, that you need to wrap it. So are there better ways than this? Sure, there might be better ways to do this. Maybe you are very familiar with rewriting the tool yourself or API wrapping the tool. Go ahead and use those. Is the output trivial? A lot of times native commands provide very basic output, and in your automation, you might not need to do anything else with that output. In other words, you don't need to send it to a PowerShell pipeline. In that case, well, maybe you don't need to wrap the command. So part of the best practices are optimize your time investment by focusing on what you need to do. Don't wrap what you don't need. What I'd prefer to do myself is I start with a native command or a console command that I'd like to wrap, and I start by wrapping only the things that I need. I don't try to eat the whole elephant all at once and fix every possible problem. I just start wrapping the basics and then add on from there. So the next article is about deciding which features to amplify. And this one, I want to show you a little bit more detail. In other words, I want to demonstrate some of this. But one of the things I want to point out to you is that the rest of the articles in here work with a console command that I was hoping that you could also work with too. And the console command that we're working with is the Azure Connected Machine Agent. You might be saying to yourself, well, I don't have an Azure account. You don't need one. You might say to yourself, well, I don't really want to install any additional software because it's hard to remove and all that. This is a tiny agent, simple install. It's cross-platform, so you can do this on Windows or Linux. And it's super easy to remove. So this is a great tool to work with if you're experimenting with Crescendo. And anyways, it's the tool that I decided to use. So that's what I'm going to work with. So we give you some instructions here. And in this article, if you would like to work with the same tool that I am, you can go to the section later in this article. And we give you some information on where to download this from. Like I said, it's free, it's small, it's easy to install, and easy to remove. Then it begins going into discussing how to explore the existing native tool and picking out what you want to do. And what I'm going to do is, rather than sit here and look at this article, I'm just going to show you. So let's go take a look at this agent. So on my Windows 11 box, I've got two PowerShell terminals open, and that's for a reason. Some of the console commands that you're going to want to work with for Crescendo are also going to require elevation. Now, let me just tell you that Crescendo is going to be able to help you with this elevation, but right now we're not to that point yet, so I want to show you what you can do. I'm going to be running this command, azcmagent, CMA, and I'm going to have to say it out loud every time I want to spell it, right? And I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to run this, but one of the things I'm going to do is run azcmagent show, and what might happen to you is you'll get this message. In order to run this, you need to have administrative privileges. Like I said, Crescendo is going to help us with this later, but for right now and to get things working, all you need to do is launch your PowerShell session in terminal or in the console. Just right-click it and say Run as Administrator. That's what I've done with this PowerShell terminal here, so that we won't run into that administrative privilege issue at this point. So what I want to do is I want to run this agent, azcmagent. Now I've already installed this on my system using the instructions out of the documentation. If I run it with no additional parameters or anything like that, what I get is the help file for azcmagent. Now this particular command has subcommands that I can drill into, and I'm going to show you what that looks like in a second, because it turns out that one of these subcommands has a bunch of stuff in it that I'd like to eventually automate. But as I'm looking through this list, there are some other things that I'd like to do, like azcmagent, this show option that's here. This gets me the basic agent status, some basic get information if you want to think of it that way. So what I'm doing here is I'm perusing this to decide where I want to get started. I don't want to eat the entire elephant at once. I want to start one place at a time, and I'm going to start with show. Now, in a little bit, I'm going to come back here to show you something else. When you're exploring this information, it helps to also know if you have any output options, like JSON. We'll come back to that in a minute. So right now, I would like to automate show. Now, to get comfortable with this, to understand what kind of data gets produced, I'm going to run that command. I'm going to clear the screen, say azcmagent show, and take a look at the output that it gives me. Now, if you were to pipe this to get member, as soon as it finally decides to display, if you were to pipe this to get member, what you're going to find out is that, like most console commands, this is providing me with string data. So I wouldn't be able to easily use this in a PowerShell pipeline, which could throw off my automation. So what I'd like to do, my end result here, is I'd like to automate azcmagent show, turn it into a commandlet, maybe like get azcmagent, and I'd like to be able to see this data as object data so I could use it in a pipeline. So armed with what we know right now, let's go back over to the documentation. At this point, I'm going to go to creating your first Crescendo commandlet. Well, we didn't put the word first in there, but you get the idea. Now, what we want to do is we want to make that configuration file. Now, There's a couple of ways that you can do that. We've given you some information in here on how to create the configuration file. I got to be honest with you. Right up here, right next to here on your screen, just take a magic marker or whatever and just write down. Or you could copy one. No, don't do that. But you could just copy an existing JSON configuration and edit it. However, if you don't have one right now, though we did include some in the samples, if you don't have one, you can make your own from scratch. Now, let me show you what this documentation offers, because it can be a little bit confusing. We've offered one way in order to create a Crescendo object. This is not the text file. What this does, and I'm splatting some of the parameter information to new Crescendo command, and this creates a command object or a Crescendo object that describes the command with this information. Now, this can be used for a lot of things, and we're going to talk more about this when we take a look at some advanced things that you could do with Crescendo. But what this doesn't do is it doesn't create you the JSON text file properly formatted, ready to go for you to edit it. We do that down here. This piece of little code that you can grab and paste, which is basically what I'm going to do, is just copy and paste this, will allow you to generate the text file so that you can edit your own configuration. Matter of fact, let me just copy this. Let's go take a look at what this does. So let me go back over to my machine, and what I'd like to do is I'm going to launch vscode. So I'm just going to type code, get vscode up and running, and we're going to paste that in and see what it does. So here's, I want to come back to this file. Let me do a new file right down here. And I'm just going to paste this in. Now I've got my terminal is coming up. And I actually, before I run this and show you where I'm at, I want to change my folder location. Notice I'm changing my location, well, to a different place. The reason I'm doing that is that this is going to output a text file when it runs, and I want it to put it in that location, demo2. So take a look at this last line first. Whatever is in $new configuration will get converted to JSON and then output to a file called agent. Well, let me change this. You don't have to change this. I'm just changing it because I like to have Crescendo in there so I can keep track of everything. Agent crescendo.json. What are we going to put into that file? Well, let's see here. New configuration. We're going to start off by sticking the schema in there. The schema is going to help us with tooltips and things like that as we're working with this configuration file. Also, I'm going to start with some first commands inside of this configuration file with some properties and values, let me say it that way, of the verb and the noun of what I want to call my brand new commandlet. We'll see this again in a second. And then the location of where the original console tool is physically located on my system. At that point, we could run this. And well, let's do that. Let's see what it does. I'm going to hit F5 and run it. And let's see if it made a file code. And we'll just open it up. And what do we call it? AZCM agent Crescendo. There it is. Let's take a look at the actual file that it generated. So here's the file that script generated. At the very top up here, you'll see the schema. This schema is going to provide us with tooltips and assistance as we work in this file. Matter of fact, you're going to see a demonstration of that in just a second. Beneath that, you have the commands section with an open brace. This command section will allow you to have one or many defined commands. So when you export this to a Crescendo module, that module might give you one commandlet, or you can have it define hundreds of commandlets for you. Now we're going to start off by defining just one right now, but throughout this series, we'll end up with 4 or 5 different commands defined in this module, so you can see how that process works. For this very first command, there's an open squiggly here, and for that very first command, you'll see I've got verb and noun. This is what I want the commandlet named. What's the verb and what's the noun going to be? I kind of like show AZCM agent for this. The original name is the name and location of that console file. So you can do a dir or get child item and find out where that console command is located. So we need to know that full location. Underneath that is the original command elements. Now, this might be a little bit tricky, but I want you to think about this. What additional things did you need to add to that console command to get it to work? So when I was doing this originally, I did azcma agent space show. Well, I'm going to need to add that here because that's what I want it to execute when it runs. So what you put in here is every additional command element right up until the point to where you want to make parameters. Now, we haven't gotten to parameters yet, and this command's pretty simple. So all I need is show for right now. What platform would you like to have? Oh, I'm going to need to have a comma after this. What platform would you like? Well, in this case, I'm just going to focus in on a Windows platform. So tell you what, let me clean this up a little bit. Get rid of this. I don't need this here comma. And in fact, I can put this all on one line. And that's what I'm going to do just to make it nice. And bink, there we go. Now, Crescendo can help you with elevation and a lot of other things. And these are detailed things that we'll be looking at throughout the series. Since they're all null right now and I don't need them, I'm going to get rid of them just so I can show you how simple this can look. Now, I do need to warn you, there is a couple of things that I do want to show you right now, which is description. So I'm going to leave that in there. And I'm going to get rid of some other things, but leave output handlers. So these are the last two things I want to show you. Already, this is looking like a pretty short configuration file. Now, description. Oh, this is easy. Here, I want to show you two things. I'm going to get rid of this altogether, and I'm just going to type it all over again. In fact, let's go up here. Oh, I don't want to leave him. Yeah, let's go up here and watch what happens when I start typing. Oh, see, description. See, these are the tooltips that the schema provides for me. That's what I wanted you to see. Now, here's what the description is. You know how when you go to get help, you get a description of what the commandlet does? That's what this is. So I'm going to put in a very simple description. Let's see, gets the machine agent status. That's close enough. Now for output handler, this is where the fun begins. And I've got good news. First of all, let me clean this up a little bit, get to the output handler. The output handler is what converts the console command's string-based output to object-based output so you can use it in a PowerShell pipeline. Now, if you don't need to use it in a PowerShell pipeline, you don't need to have an output handler. You can just let it provide string output data to the screen. However, in my case, I do want an output handler. How we start that is we need a little bit of structure. We need an open brace and a closed brace. We need an open squiggly and a closed squiggly. And in the middle here, there's a couple of things I want. First of all, I want to define the parameter set name. And so parameter set name, thank you, schema, is going to be the default parameter set name. Here's the important part. The output handler needs, the output handlers section needs a handler. Now we have three different types of handlers, and in an advanced section later on in the series, we'll get into all of these output handlers. The most basic and simplest output handler is the one I'm going to show you right now. This output handler works for commands that support JSON in their output. So now here's the important part. I need a handler that's going to convert this string-based output into an object. Now stop for a second. This is really important. We have three different types of handlers depending upon your situation. What I'm about to do is show you the simplest of the three. This will work. You can call it boilerplate code. This same code will work for any modern console command that supports JSON as its output. Believe me, if you have a modern command, this is the way to go. Now, how do I know? I'm going to call this up real quick and just try to remind you a little bit. azcm agent. I'm going to go into the help file. When you're looking at the help file, you may have remembered when I started this to say, hey, is there any additional output options? Older or legacy style console commands, they only output string data. However, the modern ones will give you different options, perhaps JSON. Now, if I were to run a command with this option selected, like azcm agent show, and to put in the JSON command. It takes it a second for this to run, but the output is going to look, well, different than you originally saw it. Oh yeah, see, it's in a JSON format. This format lets me easily convert this to an object. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to write, there's 2 places I have to edit this. I'm going to finish writing this handler to grab that output, convert it from JSON, and display it on the screen. This will be object data, and I'm also going to give it an object type. I'm just going to make one up so that if I pipe it to getMember, it has an object type. So how I'm going to do that is this. I'm going to grab an array called $args. This array has all of the output from that command already in it. I'm going to pipe this to convert from JSON. And then I'm going to add a member to this with a type name. Oh, I know it's giving me some red squigglies. We'll figure that out. I get a type name, AZCMA status. This is the name of the object. Now, you don't need this add member line. You don't need to give it an object type name, but I like to do that so that you'll see later that I get it in my getMember when I pass it to that. Now, I'm not quite done yet. While this line is good and it's ready to go, I need something else. There were 2 things. I have to go back to the original command elements. This is where I'm telling it how to run the command up to the parameters I want. In this particular command, I don't have any additional parameters, but there is one other thing I want this command to do every time it runs. That's, I would like it to, let me put a comma in here and add, I always want it to add JSON to anything that it runs. That way that the output comes to JSON and then my output handler can convert it from JSON and give me my object. That object I can then use down the pipeline. Now, if you take a look at this configuration, it's pretty short. It's pretty easy to get this set up, except for one thing. I still have these red squigglies in here and I need to fix that. I've made a couple of syntax errors. Let's see. After each one of these elements, you need to have a comma for the next one. Oh, that fixed the handler. And let's see, I've got, oh, this is, I made a mistake. So this whole thing needs to be in a string. So quote, args, convert from JSON, add member, pass through, and then put it here. My end quote. Oh, that looks much better. No more red squigglies telling me that I have problems. So this configuration file is ready to be tested. But let me save it. And let's try it out. Now, I'm one of those folks that likes to try things in the actual PowerShell terminal / console itself. So where am I located right now? Oh, that's not the right place. Let's go to demo 2. Let's try that again. There we go. Let's just make sure. Yeah, let me see what's here. Oh, there's the configuration file that I just saved. Now, I want to see if Crescendo can export this to a module. Let me clear the screen. Let's do export Crescendo module. Thank you, tab key. This has a parameter called configuration file, and the configuration file I want, the one that I just saved, and I need to give it a module name. The module name that I'm going to give it is, well, I'm going to keep it simple, AZCM agent. Let me strike enter and see if it builds and auto-generates that module for me. No news is good news. Let's do a directory here. Oh, and there it is. There's the PSD one, the module manifest, and the module PSM one itself. You can feel free to go look at the auto-generated code. In my case, I'm just going to import the module. AZ. There it is. And let's try to run it. Let's see, we named it show-az. And what I like to do at this point is hit the tab key and see if it can find it itself. Hey, it found it. Let's see if it runs it. Fail. Why did it fail? Unknown command, show for AZ. I know this works. As a matter of fact, I've typed it. You've seen me type. Here's what the problem is. Take a look. So while PowerShell is case insensitive, a lot of console commands, especially traditional ones and even new modern ones, they might be case sensitive, in which case it's not AZCMA agent with a capital show. It needs to be a lowercase show. Yeah, I told you. See, you run across these things as you're working with this. So now in this case, let's go ahead and save it and let's try it again. So I'm going to go back over here, and here's how simple this is. I've made a correction to it. So I just need to type in that export again and run it again. Oh, it says it already exists. Not a problem. We'll add dash force. Lo and behold, it did it. Let's do this. Let's import the module. Now look, I've already imported this module once, so it's already been imported, and it won't re-import it unless I force it to. So I'm going to put a dash force on this. It'll re-import it. Now let's try our command, which was show AZCM. Again, I'm going to see if it'll finish it for me. It does. We'll try to run it and see if we get the result that we were hoping for. Yep, we sure did. And so now it's got this result. And let's go ahead and pick something like a model. That'll be easy for me to type, because here's what I want to do is I want to do show. AZCM agent pipe to select object, just to show you that this works. Dash property, let's call it model. That's what we're looking for. It'll run the command, it'll send it down the PowerShell pipeline and give us the answer that we expected. So it works just like we expected. Pretty cool, huh? That's taking your very first command and wrapping it with Crescendo. Things to watch out for. Case sensitivity. That got me. Other things, that output handler. That's pretty much boilerplate code, but you need to know whether your modern command, or excuse me, whether the console command that you're working with is a modern command that can provide some structured output, which makes it so easy for the output handler to deal with, or is it a traditional one? Now look, later on, we'll show you how to deal with that. It's a lot more challenging if you have to write all of the output handler. Now in the next video, what are we going to do? We're going to build on what we already have, and we're going to do another command, basically copy what we got, and then add another command that has parameters to it. Then after that, we'll look at elevation and outputters. Got a lot more fun to do. So we'll see you at the next one. And again, maybe this is a great opportunity where you get a chance to help someone else. See ya.